All right. Well, welcome everybody. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Cherise Esparza, and I am the co-founder and chief product officer for SecurityGate.io. Thank you for joining us in this discussion this morning. Today, our guest is Jonathon Gordon. Jonathon, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell the audience a little more about you.
Yes, sure. So my name's Jonathon Gordon. I'm actually the directing analyst for TakePoint Research. So I spend most of my days conducting research, analysis, and consult on the topic of industrial cybersecurity with end users across verticals and also with integrators and vendors.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us this morning for a discussion around what I think is a pretty hot topic right now, given the climate of the pandemic and just our overall environment of where we are in the market. It's around IT/OT convergence. Now, I know a lot of you all have probably heard this phrase or you think it's a buzzword, but I feel like that more importantly now and more than ever, it's becoming real. And so I hope today to understand a little bit more why it's becoming real for our IT leaders and OT operations leaders as well. Jonathon, can you share with us a little bit of background in terms of what IT/OT convergence means and kind of the trends and why we're seeing this shift happen right now?
Yes, so it's true. OT people tend to shy away from buzzwords, and there are some people out there that don't like necessarily the term OT/IT convergence, but nevertheless, it is happening, and it is accelerating, and we believe that the reasons behind that are just the upside of what you get when you start connecting OT networks. In particular, things like if you look at smart industry 4.0 and smart factories, the analytics that you can get out of the existing systems enable companies to really understand and better understand their own environments, and then take that information and create data-driven decisions to improve productivity, right? Increase uptime, improve safety. So take predictive analytics is a great example. Regardless of the vertical, those sort of things really give you an advantage. And if you can get enough data, you can build a considerable, sustainable competitive advantage of a business against a competitor that's not doing that. So in short, the upside of digitization or really data-driven approach is critical. So that's really what's driving a lot of these projects, a lot of this move towards convergence or integration. From a cybersecurity point of view, it's really being driven by the fact that IT security don't have the visibility into the OT networks that they need to do their job, right? So in most cases, what we see these days is it's the CISO, the CSIO, whoever is responsible for the security in the organization, is tasked with building a security playbook, building out a security risk management on the security side. And there's a black hole, which is the OT network and the operations side. So from an industrial cybersecurity point of view, the CISO really needs to bring that into to integrate it very, very tightly with the playbooks that they have on the IT side, integrate it into the procedures, the mechanisms they use to manage risk throughout the rest of the company. And that requires that type of integration, that type of convergence.
So I want to touch back real quickly when you mentioned the need for improved data analytics around predictive maintenance, reducing non-productive time and safety, more so around the fact that though the data is offshore and being supported by a lot of third-party companies on behalf of, let's say, the operational facility. That because there's a lack of resources to manage and interpret that information, Is it because that's the model that is being presented in our environments, that it's this third-party management of data offshore now? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think, and again, the response or the answer will differ slightly according to the vertical, right? We talk about OT generically, but it could be manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, energy, oil and gas. I think historically, when we look at typically bigger pieces of that puzzle, think of critical infrastructure, definitely oil and gas. The model that evolved over time was that there are many vendors, right, OEMs that that provide products and platforms, and then contracted to service those products and platforms. So literally, you could have a dozen to 24 or more vendors and their service teams and their operation teams, plus umpteen number of service providers that are also providing support through the different mechanisms or different projects trying to come in. And now, as we move into the realm of industrial IoT and sometimes connecting manufacturing plants directly to the cloud to get those analytics, to make those data-driven decisions, that issue is extrapolated and it's literally exponential. Now, the upside is great, but we need to be very careful and aware of the risks that we're taking on and manage those risks as we do that. So I don't think we're going back anytime. If anything, it's just going to become larger and larger.
I agree. And so it's not just the introduction of improved analytics that once was siloed in our air gap environment. It is now proliferated around multiple vendors, service providers. The data now is being accessed by an exponential part of many support users or engineers, which is now, some believe, the management of that from a data access, data privacy, data confidentiality leaks into what has been traditionally managed by the IT side of an organization. You mentioned the cloud. I feel like, and please share your thoughts around digital transformation. I feel like there's been a exponential push for digital transformation during this pandemic. How would you say this pandemic has changed that perception of the cloud and putting the data in the cloud to maintain smooth operations during this unprecedented time?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because from an OT perspective, OT engineers are often skeptical of anyone that wears an IT hat. And then if you go further up into the cloud, they sort of get more and more.
Conversation, the culture dynamics between IT and OT, we could have a whole conversation around that, but absolutely.
Yeah. That's a very important part of fact. From what we see, the people is the biggest challenge rather than technology. But and obviously, this has been a special year, or the last 6 months in particular. What we saw our end users, once they get over that sort of gut reaction and trying to figure out, what they need to do to keep the folks, their own families and the folks at home safe and come to grips with the pandemic, they need to understand what to do in their workplace and even how they work. And again, it's different across verticals, but if you take oil and gas, for example, a lot is done by actually turning up at the site, right? There'd be remote locations or things where you actually have to turn up and do something there. And the shift is, and a lot of these companies are about, how do we keep the lights on, right? Everybody else is trying to, taking care of their families, which is the right thing as well. But they need to figure out how to keep the lights on. And in the beginning of the pandemic, we saw teams of people that were quarantining within, in their workplace, just so they could keep the lights on and keep the water running. So they've had to come to grips with that type of approach, which obviously is not sustainable, which means, yes, getting more remote access in particular. And then again, this is something that the industries across verticals have been grappling with, right? how to get those dozens and dozens of service providers securely into your network, but monitoring them and making sure that they're not doing anything untoward and they're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. So that challenge has increased exponentially, along with access to data and how to protect data is, like you said, a traditional IT cybersecurity issue, right? Privacy and making sure that the data hasn't been touched and the data is authentic, etc. So what we're seeing now, and maybe it's been exacerbated by the pandemic, is that there's not really OT cybersecurity anymore. It's we use the term industrial cybersecurity because how a cloud that has direct access to a manufacturing floor, whether it's through a firewall or through a data dial, etc. There's no part of your network that isn't connected to somewhere else, and whether it's the cloud or integrating your if you have an OT cybersecurity component that's mapping and managing the doing the inventory on your network, it needs to be integrated to your firewalls. It needs to be integrated to your SIEM or SOAR, whatever your IT SOC analysts are looking at. So the today's world is really about integration. It's about convergence, and I think the pandemic has really highlighted some sections of that and made it more important in the short term.
Well, I think the integration aspect into the tools that you just mentioned in terms of the integration of the insights to a SIM or a GRC or a SOC environment that traditionally didn't go there is now there due to the cause and effects of the limited resources, mostly paralyzed by the pandemic. You mentioned something really important, and that was when individuals fear for their life and their health of their family or the stability of their job, oftentimes things are maybe not managed optimally. It's almost a survival status quo, the lights on, just like you mentioned. With that said, we can't ignore the drastic downsides and impacts it's had to our energy markets. Not only the pandemic, the price of oil crisis, et cetera, and all the layoffs that we're starting to see, all the reorganizations. Every day here, you can pick up the paper and see a big company announcing a major layoff. How do you feel that transition is going to impact this convergence? It's going to accelerate it even more? Are things going to not get done? And then in addition, budgets are obviously for the most part of the year were frozen because of the uncertainty. Talk a little bit about that from a more of an administrative budget, human resource side.
So it's a great point, and I agree with you. In the initial stages of that gut reaction, and people were trying to react to a situation that was evolving. And now I think the companies have actually done, many companies actually have a strategy in place, whether it's reducing the workforce or taking, a good look at how they spend budget, which is a lot better than many governments around the world and their reaction to the pandemic. But it is having an impact. What we see, some of the programs that weren't in place yet have sort of been put on hold. The issue is that, and obviously, what's important for companies is to treat cybersecurity as a business decision, right? It needs to have a business case, which is driven by outcomes. And obviously, at this critical point in time, threat actors are not cutting budgets. They're not rolling back their, they're not laying off people, etc. So the same people and the same agencies, the same individuals that were, attempting to infiltrate or attempting to cause harm or exfiltrate information are still doing that. And as long as the companies, approach cybersecurity and OT security, industrial security as a business decision, they understand the outcomes and the risk involved, and they make those type of decisions, including what sort of resources and what sort of staff they have in place, and whether they get external support through third party or expertise, etc. That's the best approach that they can have, right? And hopefully, we're all hoping and praying that this pandemic sort of eases out and goes away sooner rather than later, and those people that have been laid off or have been sent home, that they actually come back, because I think we had a clear lack of skills and lack of people even before the pandemic. So if anything, it's been exasperating now.
I feel like individuals that are left standing in organizations after reorgs and job cuts, they're left to manage tools in OT and vice versa. There's teams that no longer exist, but the software or the maintenance or the monitoring does. And so they are automatically getting consumed with the last man standing. And so now here you are, where before our culture was only the most skilled experts can run these softwares and understand the insights, to now it's let's do whatever it takes to maintain and understand and go forward. And oftentimes IT teams are now consuming these products, or they're not getting shared. That's just something that we're starting to see in the market from our view. So I know we are close on time, so I wanted to ask, are there any things that you'd like to impart with the community here in terms of, how to best manage the IT/OT convergence going forward? It's here, it's happening for one reason or another. What can business leaders do to prepare for this?
So I guess the most successful sort of convergences or teams that we have seen, they put the focus clearly on the people rather than starting with the technology. So it's people, it's procedures. First of all, any CISO, CSIO charged with protecting industrial company, obviously they need backing. Very, very strong backing from management and their board. Cybersecurity is not one person's problem. It should be owned by the entire organization. Obviously, it's not just the CISO's head on the chopping block if things go bad. So it's buy-in and having a very strong buy-in from upper management, and then it's building a team that's very heterogeneous, right? Pulling expertise out from definitely, obviously, their own departments, IT, cybersecurity, whether that's security leads, SOC analysts, get the chief risk officer involved, and then from the OT side, OT engineers. And I think the biggest challenge is building a team, building that team and successfully, doing that convergence is about building respect for building respect and understanding for both sides. So IT and OT have a very, very different view of the world, for good reason. They do things that are very different, and their end goals are very different within their departments, but they do have a shared common goal, which is securing the organization, keeping production going. The biggest thing that I guess CISOs learn when they come into this role is that the outcomes, when you're looking at a cyber physical system with regards to what's the worst case scenario, it looks very different in the OT world to the IT world. Yeah. And it's that understanding and building respect for each other's roles, and not trying to, hey, this is how we do it and we want you to fall in line. It's about creating a strategy together, equal ownership on according to expertise, and then building procedures and playbooks and policies will secure that company. Yeah, and language and risk is a big part of that, obviously. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan, for your time today. It was truly a pleasure to discuss one of those topics that, I think we're just seeing unfold before our eyes in a pretty rapid pace, especially if you've been in the industrial world for a while. It's definitely a new world in all aspects. So thank you for your time today, and
But
we'll talk soon. Thank you.
look forward to it.